Before we begin, remember, this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Viewer discretion is advised. For nearly a decade, a city lived in fear of a faceless predator. He was known only by a name whispered on talk radio, in dark bars, and on late-night news broadcasts, the night caller. He didn't stalk only one type of victim. He didn't follow a clear pattern, and he didn't leave behind fingerprints, DNA, or even footprints. Instead, he left a single calling card, one that became the hallmark of his terror, a strand of thin, red thread, always placed near the body, always unmistakable. The city of Easton, population 430,000, was the hunting ground. By day, it looked like any other hard-working American town, but by night, it belonged to him. The first victim was discovered on an October morning in 2011. His name was Daniel Foster, a 32-year-old taxi driver. Police found him slumped in his cab near the abandoned rail yard, strangled with some kind of cord. At first, the case was seen as an isolated killing, but when a florist named Claire Donnelly was murdered 3 weeks later in an alley behind her shop, and investigators discovered the same chilling detail, a strand of red thread tucked beneath her fingernails, the pattern began to emerge. The night caller had arrived. Over the following months, more bodies appeared. A young college student, a retired postal worker, a mother of two who never came home from her late shift. Each crime scene was methodical, deliberate. The victims were strangled. Some had been subdued beforehand, maybe with chloroform. Others appeared to have been ambushed. What they all shared was silence. No defensive wounds, no sign of struggle loud enough to wake neighbors or draw attention. And then, the thread. Always there, always red. By 2013, the city of Easton was on edge. Rumors began to swirl. People claimed they'd received silent phone calls in the middle of the night. Calls that hung up as soon as they answered. Was it the killer? Was that why he was called a night caller? There was no proof, no way to trace them, but the fear of the ringing phone became almost as terrifying as the killings themselves. Ordinary life began to fracture. Night joggers vanished from the streets. Bars emptied earlier than ever before. Parents warned their kids to keep the landline unplugged after dark. And yet, despite all precautions, the murders continued. One of the reasons the night caller was so effective was confusion. Witnesses came forward, but their stories contradicted each other. One swore he was tall and broad-shouldered. Another said he was short, hunched, wearing a cap. Someone else insisted they had glimpsed a woman. Police had nothing solid. Every description canceled out the others. Detectives wondered if there might be more than one killer, but the red thread suggested otherwise. It was as though he wanted to be seen, but only as a blur, a shadow, an impression too vague to pin down. The phone records were equally useless. Several victims had received silent calls in the days or weeks before their deaths, but investigators traced them back to prepaid burners, purchased with cash, used once, and thrown away. The night caller was a ghost. For investigators, the red thread became both the signature and the obsession. What did it mean? Some criminologists suggested ritual significance. In certain mythologies, the red thread of fate connects people destined to meet. Others believed it symbolized blood, control, or destiny. Maybe it was just his way of taunting them, a clue without meaning. A needle jabbed into the heart of investigators every time they arrived too late. What was undeniable was this. The red thread meant he had been there. He had been close enough to take life, and yet far enough to vanish before anyone noticed. By 2015, the murders had escalated, from every few months to every few weeks, sometimes even days apart. 21 victims would ultimately be attributed to him. They ranged in age from 19 to 67, men and women, students, teachers, cashiers, retirees. There was no demographic, no pattern, no logic. That's what made him terrifying. You couldn't point to one group and say, I'm safe because I'm not them. Anyone could be next. The tip line was flooded. Thousands of calls poured into the police department, most of them worthless. Vigilante groups formed, patrolling the streets with baseball bats and flashlights. Neighbors accused neighbors. Easton stopped feeling like a city. It started feeling like prey. The night caller's methods became clearer with each autopsy. The ligature marks were precise, thin, consistent. He strangled quickly, efficiently. Many victims were incapacitated first, either through surprise or chemicals. This wasn't rage. It wasn't messy. It was rehearsed, controlled. He killed like a man, tying knots, his hands deliberate, his actions practiced. The only irregularity was the placement of the thread. Sometimes on a pillow, sometimes in a pocket, sometimes laid carefully across a windowsill. It was the only flourish in an otherwise clinical process. It suggested he wanted them to know it was him, that the city belonged to him. In 2017 and 2018, the killings reached their peak. At times, there were 2 murders in the same month. But then, strangely, they slowed. 2019 saw only 2 confirmed victims. In 2020, only 1. Why? Did he grow bored? Did he get sloppy? Did he take satisfaction in the fear he had already spread? Some wondered if he was dead or had left Easton entirely. Others thought he was lying low, waiting for the city to breathe again before striking. The truth was he was still out there, still watching. And then, one night, he made a mistake. It was August 14th, 2020. At 2:13 a.m., a grainy black and white security camera outside a pawn shop caught a man walking quickly across the frame. Nothing unusual, except for one detail. On his wrist, dangling in the glow of the infrared light, was something thin. Investigators zoomed in, a strand of red thread. For the first time in 9 years, they had more than smoke. They had a face. The footage wasn't perfect, but it revealed enough. Medium build, dark jacket, and most importantly, a scar running from his cheekbone down to his jaw. The night caller had slipped. With that scar, investigators began combing through records. Hospital admissions, assault reports, mugshots, thousands of hours of cross-referencing. One name began to surface again and again: Elias Vanner. Age 42, a drifter with a history of short-term jobs, warehouse shifts, night security, truck loading. He moved frequently, and every time he relocated, the killings seemed to follow within months. Back in 2009, he'd been arrested for trespassing. During the scuffle, he'd been cut across the face, leaving the exact scar seen on the footage. It was him. It had to be. Police began a covert surveillance operation. Vanner lived in a decrepit boarding house, barely furnished, bare walls, little trace of personality. He was quiet, unremarkable, but his nights told another story. He often left for hours, walking the city's streets with no clear destination. Always at night, always alone. On October 3rd, 2020, detectives followed him as he trailed a woman leaving a diner after a late shift. He kept his distance, watching, closing in. Before he could strike, they moved in. He was arrested in a side alley without incident. In his pocket was a spool of red thread. Vanner never confessed. In interrogation, he was silent for hours. When pressed, he smiled faintly and said only one thing: "Everyone's tied to someone. You just have to know where to pull." The trial lasted 6 months. The prosecution built their case with surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and years of painstaking case files. Witness testimony, though conflicting, placed him at the edges of multiple crime scenes. The red thread, the scar, the surveillance trail, it all came together. The jury deliberated for just 9 hours. Guilty on 21 counts of first-degree murder. His sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When a verdict was read, families wept in the courtroom. For nearly a decade, Easton had lived in fear, checking over shoulders, unplugging phones at night, waiting for the next body to be discovered. Now, the predator was caged. The night caller had believed he could be untouchable. He had believed he could vanish like smoke. But even smoke leaves a trace, and all it took was a single strand of thread to unravel him. For 9 years, the people of Easton lived under a shadow. They had whispered his name, feared his silent calls, and dreaded the discovery of a red thread in their lives. But the truth of every predator is this: eventually, they make a mistake. The night caller's mistake was small, so small he probably never noticed. A thread on his wrist, a slip of arrogance, and from that moment, the hunt was no longer hopeless. The hunter had been marked. The city would never forget the terror he brought, but it would also never forget the relief of seeing him finally led away in handcuffs. Because sometimes justice doesn't come quickly. Sometimes it takes years of patience, obsession, and fear. But when it comes, it ends the silence.